Hello everyone, and welcome to the Middle Ages channel. Today we're journeying back to a time of towering castles, valiant knights, and powerful monarchs. We're talking about the Age of Kings, a period that shaped the very foundations of modern Europe. So what exactly was the Age of Kings? Generally, we're looking at the High and Late Middle Ages, roughly from the 11th to the 15th centuries. This wasn't just a time of fairy tales. It was an era of intense political change, where the power of kings grew from being first among equals to becoming the central authority of the state. At the start of this period, a king's power was often limited. He relied heavily on his powerful nobles, the dukes and barons who controlled vast lands and had their own armies. Think of it like a CEO who needs the approval of a very strong board of directors for every major decision. This system, known as feudalism, meant that a king's authority was often challenged. A powerful noble might have more direct control over his territory than the king himself. The king's domain, the land he directly controlled, was often smaller than the combined lands of his vassals. Loyalty was a fragile thing, often bought with land and titles. But things started to change. Several key factors helped centralize power in the hands of the monarchs. One of the biggest was warfare. The constant conflicts, from small-scale feudal disputes to massive campaigns like the Crusades and the 100 Years' War, required larger, more organized armies. Kings began to move away from relying on feudal levies, where nobles provided knights for a limited time. Instead, they started hiring professional soldiers, mercenaries who fought for pay. This was a game changer. A paid army was loyal to the person who paid them, the king, not to a local lord. To pay for these armies, kings needed money, which led to the development of more sophisticated systems of taxation. This need for cash also led kings to forge alliances with a new and rising class, the townspeople, or the bourgeoisie. Merchants, artisans, and bankers living in growing towns and cities were becoming incredibly wealthy. They often found the constant squabbling of local nobles bad for business. A strong king could offer peace, stability, and standardized laws and currencies, which made trade easier and more profitable. In return for royal charters that granted them rights and freedoms from local lords, these towns would provide the king with loans and taxes. This new source of wealth made kings less dependent on the landed aristocracy. Another crucial element in the rise of royal power was the law. Kings began to establish royal courts and a system of justice that applied to the entire kingdom. Previously, justice was often local, administered by feudal lords. By creating a higher royal court of appeal, kings positioned themselves as the ultimate arbiters of justice. People could now appeal to the king's law over the judgment of their local lord. This not only extended the king's authority, but also created a sense of a unified kingdom under a single rule of law. Think of figures like Henry II of England, who was instrumental in developing the common law system. Of course, the nobles didn't just sit back and watch their power erode. The history of this era is filled with rebellions and civil wars as powerful lords fought to maintain their privileges. The most famous example is the Magna Carta in 1215, where English barons forced King John to agree that even the king was not above the law. While it was a setback for absolute royal power, it also ironically reinforced the idea of a single, unified legal framework for the entire kingdom. Let's not forget the role of the church. The relationship between kings and the papacy was complex and often contentious. Popes claimed spiritual authority over all of Christendom, including the kings. The investiture controversy, for example, was a century-long power struggle over who had the right to appoint church officials. But the church also provided kings with a vital tool: divine right. The idea that a king was chosen by God gave his rule immense legitimacy. Coronations were deeply religious ceremonies anointing the king as God's chosen representative on earth. This divine backing made rebelling against the king not just a political act, but a sin. By the end of the Middle Ages, the political landscape of Europe had been transformed. Figures like Philip Augustus of France had masterfully expanded the royal domain and crushed the power of overmighty vassals. In Spain, the Reconquista, the centuries-long effort to retake the Iberian Peninsula, forged a powerful and unified Spanish monarchy under Ferdinand and Isabella. The old feudal order was fading, replaced by the early stirrings of the nation-state, with the king at its heart. These medieval kings were more than just rulers. They were nation-builders. They created the administrative, legal, and military structures that would evolve into the modern states we know today. Their struggles, their ambitions, and their innovations laid the groundwork for the next chapter of European history. The Age of Kings was a complex, often brutal, but absolutely fascinating period of transformation. It was the time when the crown truly began to shine, casting a long shadow that extends all the way to the present day. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the Age of Kings. If you found this fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the Middle Ages channel for more deep dives into this incredible era. Let me know in the comments which medieval king you find most interesting. Until next time, stay curious.